There's a story we like to tell about technology, which is intelligent, self-running, and very, very frictionless. And again, AI system, we are told how it handles complexity, which is powered by algorithm, data, and automation. They're solving problems faster than any human could. But that's only half the truth. Behind every so-called smart system is a system which is really, really messy, one that still relies on people who are flagging errors, they are reviewing outputs and making the real judgment call that machines can't. AI, they don't run just on data. It runs on human labor. And much of that labor is happening very, very quietly, very invisibly in places far from Silicon Valley, in regions where stable employment is limited due to conflict, displacement, or economic challenges. Digital work, it offers a flexible way to earn and stay connected. So here's the question. What does it mean when people who are left out of the digital economy are the ones doing the work that keeps it moving? And how can we design systems that don't just depend on their labor, but actually brings into question the respect, the contribution, and offer them the real opportunity? Welcome to the Builders of Broken Bazaar. I am Dr. Tabish Zaman, and today's guest is someone who's been working to answer that, not just in theory, but on the ground. Iva Gumnishka. She's the founder of Humans in the Loop, a social enterprise that trains and employs conflict-affected individuals to provide essential human input for AI system. She's part of that very, very rare group, and I can say that confidently, asking not just what AI can do, but who it includes and who it leaves behind. From human rights at Colombia to refugee camps, from bootstrapping to winning the Cartier Women's Initiative Award. Iva has built a model where displaced people don't just survive, but actually shape the digital future. In a world obsessed with speed and automation, her work offers something very rare, a human-centered approach to innovation. So let's get into it. There's so much to learn. I'm so excited. Iva, it's such an honor having you on board. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tabish, and really thanks for the wonderful introduction.
Before we dive into your work, again, we'll keep the field really, really open. My very first question to you would be, how are you feeling at the moment about what is happening around you?
Right now, I'm feeling excited. I'm seeing a lot of people like you and me who care about social issues, who care about social justice, and who are doing their best to give voice to those who are marginalized, to provide opportunities, to contribute to causes that may be unpopular but are close to their heart. And I have the chance to work with many such people. So it's really exciting to see that you're not alone and to see that there's others like you who are working on the same thing. Little by little, become just small drop by small drop, we become an ocean. And this can lead to real systemic change.
I love that thought. Absolutely beautiful. We've been looking at it for quite some time now in terms of what's happening. And again, I won't point to specific events as such, but if you reflect back on the last few weeks, whether big or small, has anything reminded you of why are you doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially now that my professional work has more and more been focused on Palestine as a big issue that today we're witnessing on a daily basis, scenes of what is happening there. This serves as a constant reminder and as a constant stimulation for each one of us to rethink what are we doing in the midst of this crisis, in the midst of this genocide, and how are we contributing to solving this, to finding a solution, to stopping, all the crimes that are happening in front of our eyes. So for me, this type of social media feed that many of us are exposed to with scenes that are really heartbreaking and very difficult to handle, it should not weigh down on us in terms of just us feeling frustrated and helpless, but rather should impulse us to action and to think every day of what more can we be doing to solve big crises like this one.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you brought that to the fore. But having worked in this area for so long and you're so close to the issue, Do you think this is going to go away at all? Is there a real effort on part of those who can actually solve this crisis in the near future? Do you see it going away?
The people who really have the power to stop this do not have the will, and that's for sure. Otherwise, it would not be going on for almost 2 years. However, there's a very strong sentiment and a very strong movement coming from the grassroots level that is really pushing forward for the Palestinian cause and for a just solution to what is happening, and not just what has been happening for the past 2 years, but what has been happening for the past 75 years, right, of the occupation of Palestine and the colonization of Palestine. So thanks to this grassroots movement, I mean, just yesterday on August 3rd, there were 300,000 people marching in Sydney in support of the Palestinian cause, and that's not a small number. And there have been similar protests and manifestations for throughout these past months in so many different cities around the world, and people are really trying to support the Palestinian cause in different ways. So I feel very encouraged by that, and I do feel that even though there are very powerful interests at stake, that this grassroots movement in the end is going to become mainstream and will in the end overpower any other competing forces.
Thank you. Yes, and it's very moving, and it has taken a bit of a momentum to develop this, isn't it? You've seen this happening, obviously, for the past few years. But now the grassroots movement, when it comes to this particular issue, when it comes to Palestine and what Palestinian people have been suffering, this has taken some time to build. And which is why I want to take you back right at the beginning of your journey, how you look at it, because you studied human rights at Columbia University, which is the hotbed of the Palestinian issues now, as we are seeing in and around us. And then you are running a very tech-driven social enterprise in your country, Bulgaria, which doesn't often hog the limelight, as we say it. You work in across Syria, Ukraine, Iraq, and of course, Palestine. This is not a typical path, Eva. So what first drew you to this intersection between human rights and digital work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I can go back to my days at university, I was not intending to go back to Bulgaria at that point. I was in New York. I was really excited about staying there and working at international organizations like the UN. But of course, I realized that once you've graduated from university, the only opportunities available to you are unpaid internships or like very low positions. And I just had it very present that I needed to also make a living. And it was quite scary and daunting for me to try and stay in New York and to, work on this and to scale, and climb that ladder, which is so long and it takes so much time, and there's so much competition for these types of entry-level positions, big humanitarian organizations. And at the same time, I realized that there are, important things happening also in my region, in my country. The Syrian refugee crisis had been going on for some time when I graduated around 2016, 17. And I thought, okay, maybe it's time for me to go back and to actually contribute to how my country is handling the refugee crisis, just because it was not handling it well. But to be honest, there were militias organized by civilians around the border who were hunting down migrants, many of whom are refugees and are trying to cross the border in order to seek asylum or to go through the country in order to reach Germany, which was the main country offering asylum to people, but it was offering it to only those who were able to reach it by foot. So many people exposed themselves to these very perilous and dangerous journeys across the whole of Europe in order to reach Germany. So it was really a big crisis. It was not managed well. Even countries like Austria and Germany that were welcoming refugees were not ensuring that there were safe ways for passage for these people, and resettlement programs and so on. Settlement programs were really designed in a way that was very dysfunctional across the European Union. So in any case, they created this whole crisis, and so many families and people had to walk this entire distance and pay exorbitant amounts of money to smugglers. So it was a big industry that also developed in this part of Europe. Anyways, it was a really big crisis, and I thought, okay, let me go back home, try to see what I can do about this with my, new skills and my energy and my inspiration. And one of the things that really helped was that I didn't have any student debt. because this is, I guess, what usually ties you down to these more traditional paths after college. You end up in investment banking, or you end up in, different types of areas that inevitably are going to lead you to earn money and to be able to pay off your student debts, right? I didn't have that because I was on a scholarship. So Columbia kind of made an investment in humanity through sponsoring my education, so that I was able to dedicate myself to these social causes, which of course was unpaid work for the first 2 years of my work at Humans in the Loop. I was just trying to figure out how to make it work. So yeah, this is what brought me to create Humans in the Loop. And the vision for the company was to provide work to Syrian refugees and other types of refugees who are coming in the country and were unable to find any suitable opportunities because maybe, they lacked the skills, or they didn't speak the local language, or they didn't have a very high level of English language. So something easy, accessible, that could be, the first job for these people once they arrive in the country, and could help them to stabilize their life, to start earning revenue, to earn the livelihoods, for their families. So that was our vision. We ended up working in AI as kind of a coincidence, just because it was a very novel niche back then, 2017. There wasn't even field called data annotation. We just decided, okay, let's give it a try, see how it works. So that's how it started.
Brilliant. You shed light on quite a few things there, but I would say the importance of education there, isn't it? In terms of what Columbia offered you. The vision shaped your thinking, which is so refreshing, because we have a lot of MBAs here, which I teach. It's very difficult to imagine students coming out and thinking about taking a social cause or looking at the social side of entrepreneurship, which is a very hard sell, because there is no economics associated. Or I would say, yes, economics is associated, but it's associated in a very, very different way. Which is why your journey is very refreshing, and it's wonderful to see how you saw things. And the other thing you mentioned was the migration issue, which has been happening quite some time in the Western world. It's a system which has been designed, which really is dated now. I know we're talking about technology on one hand, but migration is a very big issue, and it is something which needs looking at, isn't it? With your Humans in the Loop, what you have been working on, what you have been trying to focus on, any particular moment which you saw on the ground, which was like, you know what, I will be addressing that gap, I'll be addressing that problem, which surprisingly no one else seems to be interested at all?
Yes, I would say it all started when I was still researching and doing interviews with organizations on the ground in Bulgaria. Of course, everyone was kind of scrambling at that point to provide humanitarian assistance. These organizations were very underfunded. There was a lot of miscommunication. Different organizations were maybe coming in, starting with UNIOM, Médecins Sans Frontières, so different humanitarian organizations that wherever there is a crisis, they just go in with their own programs, with their own funding. They don't care about what's available, what the other stakeholders are doing, and so on. So there was this big need for coordination. And nobody was working on livelihoods, just because that's also like a second thought after reception, humanitarian assistance, healthcare, and so on. So this is why I decided to focus on livelihoods and to really, just try to support these people who are coming in. We actually started with one course subsidized by the Red Cross in Bulgaria, where there were 10 people who wanted to find a job, and I was their teacher. So we spent like around 5 weeks together, just teaching them English, computer skills, and learning about each one of them, about their background, their dreams for the future, what they want to work, and so on, so that we can shape the program a little bit to their needs. That was a very nice experience, because again, I was a person who led the course, designed the curriculum, taught and interacted with all the students. So it really was this very hands-on experience where you get to know everyone, you become good friends. It was a really nice small community. And that was actually the core team that started Humans in the Loop.
You mentioned about how the big organizations in the social space, they come in, they have got a system, they know how things work because they've been doing it for a very, very long time. But the sustainability element is missing, isn't it, when it comes to these big organizations? So do you think you being local from that part of the world, understanding the challenges and having that vision for your own community allowed you to think beyond that initial help and support? Like how we are seeing in right now, the people who were silent for a very long time has suddenly started to speak, because aid is not reaching Palestinian individuals. These are two different space we are talking about. But um, the sustainability element no one talks about. Okay, what after the aid? And similarly in Bulgaria, if you've worked with refugees, which you have, what about step 2? What about step 3? And does it take a local to understand that or drive that change?
Yeah, I would say it's very different context, of course. In Bulgaria, the context was that there were organizations that did not have experience in the local region, but were coming in because of the crisis, right? So they come in with their own programs. And of course, these programs last until the crisis lasts. And afterwards, they just exit the country. They move on to more high priority locations because this is how their organizations work and how their funding works. So in Bulgaria, that did create a lot of programs, and people who were employed in these positions, maybe as social workers, who knew that their contract is going to last for 1 year and afterwards that's it. So it did create a lot of lack of sustainability and continuity for these programs. Instead of investing in the local infrastructure of the local refugee camps, for example, which are still there and are hosting people, but they still have the same horrible conditions like before, even though there were so many organizations that have gone through the territory. But of course, it was a very different context just because it wasn't an active conflict area.
Yeah,
it was an area where refugees come in and go through the country. In contrast, Palestine now is an active conflict area. So you cannot even think about the day after before solving what's currently happening in terms of the act of genocide. So I would say definitely it really helps to be investing in local solutions and locally driven initiatives and organizations like UNRWA that have so many years of experience and such a wide network of workers on the ground. They have something like 400 aid distribution sites and 12,000 workers on the ground. So they have this really, massive network of people that are there to distribute these types of humanitarian aid. They have, all of the trucks necessary to feed the people in Gaza for 3 months. Anyways, there's a lot that can be achieved by just allowing them to do their job. Yeah, the problem in Palestine right now is that there is such a strong movement against UNRWA that is being orchestrated by the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli government.
Yeah, and it has gone so high that you see more than 2 million people, obviously. No one cares about, at least the leaders, the top management, they don't care about. But when you were doing your work, have you been pushing against the skepticism at all? From you bring tech world, you bring the humanitarian world, you bring it all together. But where is that skepticism coming from the kind of work you're doing?
Yeah, I remember a very particular example of this type of skepticism very early on when I was participating in this incubator for social projects, and we were presenting in front of a jury. And because there were a lot of scenes that were being showed through the Bulgarian media of how the conditions of life of refugees in these refugee camps, where they live in some type of like a school building where they have either small rooms or a large room where they're all hosted, and it wasn't very nice, but they had like all the sheets hanging and so on. So one of the jury members asked me, like, how are you going to even run a tech business with all of these refugees and all of their like sheets hanging and them living in such conditions and so on? So that was a very, skeptical type of response towards this idea that was bringing together refugees and technology, and trying to reimagine refugees as actors in this kind of digital economy rather than just the recipients of humanitarian aid. But I think that quickly evaporated once we actually started working, once we were able to show that, yes, we are creating jobs and these are our refugee workers and they're workers in the digital economy and they're doing this important work that's driving AI technology. So afterwards, everyone was kind of sold on that story and really became quite inspired by it and motivated by it. And we really quickly were able to grow our reputation and to spread, the news of this nice success story.
So it takes an individual like yourselves to have that pushback at the soft resistance when you're doing something like this. But let's fast forward to today. As you see AI, which is expanding, which is really scary. But what about the people who are behind the data and they are invisible to us? So why does this issue of who trains and under what condition matters right now? which your organization and you are doing?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting topic, actually, because as I mentioned, when we were starting, annotation wasn't even a field that was known. There weren't a lot of tools. But then afterwards, around 2020, 21, 22, there was this enormous boom in the whole industry. There were also many competitor companies that, really became very large. They raised a lot of money up, for example, to 60, $80 million in different rounds. We have Appen, which became a publicly traded company and, really grew enormously a lot. Several different platforms. There is one platform that became a unicorn called Scale. So there was this real explosion in the whole industry. Also thanks to the self-driving cars, which really required a lot of manual work in order to train these AI systems that required, 3D LiDAR annotation and very complex tagging of scenes that were enormously long, just hours and hours of footage. And of course, there was a lot of work being done to optimize the whole process, but there was still and still are humans needed in the whole process. The thing is that, of course, all of these solutions are made to automate human labor and to replace human labor slowly. So that was always, a question that we had to face, like what are we going to do once this labor starts being automated? So of course, there's still a lot of demand for this type of labor, but now it's more and more in the field of large language models. So LLM technologies in different languages, natural language processing, just because now, all of the hype is around chatbots, around these language technologies, such as ChatGPT and others. And really, these are quite good in English, but not so good in other languages. So there is really, this need for multilingual support, for reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is essentially, you're talking to the chatbot, you're signaling which response is good, which response is bad. You're defining how you want the chatbot to behave and what type of style and tone. So there's, very interesting tasks that are involved in this type of industry. And it's just been very exciting for us to be part of it since the early stages, right? In the early days, and to see how the industry has evolved. And I would say because our strong side is more in computer vision, now we're not as active in the field of LLMs as we used to be before in the data annotation field, but we're still working with some really inspiring computer vision applications, for example, for medical AI, which are training radiology and other types of AI processing in order to be able to detect diseases in a better way and in a more accurate way. We're working with smart agriculture, with satellite imagery, robotics. So really exciting applications of neural networks and machine learning and deep learning. So even if now all of the hype is focused on large language models, there's still a lot of companies that are doing important and work that really merits more attention and more investment. And I feel sad that, because of all of this hype around OpenAI and similar companies, more practical areas of AI have actually been a bit neglected recently.
And do you think this push has come mostly from the big organizations who are moving so fast in terms of automating? We are now talking about agentic AI, and obviously it's out there. But for our audience, would you be able to quickly tell us the data annotation in terms of its real application for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So a very quick example that's now obsolete is if you want to train a detector for cats and dogs on images, in the past would have to just manually annotate and say, okay, this is a dog, this is a cat, on maybe like 100, 1,000, 10,000 images if you want, the model to be better and better at recognizing these and distinguishing these. And that's how you would train a cat versus dog detector, right? I say that this is obsolete because now it's solved. There's a lot of models that have this data that have been trained and that are easily able to distinguish cats versus dogs, and even the most complicated images where even a human wouldn't be able to do so. So now, this type of data annotation is required in more and more complex cases. So slowly it becomes, self-driving cars. Now it becomes very complex radiology images that have to be interpreted by specialist radiologists that have to mark where there are symptoms of different diseases and so on and different anomalies. So you require higher and higher levels of expertise in these data annotators in order to train models that can perform at human level capacity or even better than human capacity.
So the technologies which we are dealing with at the moment, do you actually think that it's solving a lot of the problems in different sectors? You mentioned about the healthcare. I've done a lot of work within the healthcare sector, and living in a Western world, you would expect healthcare to be at a level which would serve the people and the community. And the amount of technology which is out there and the amount of promises we've been made when it comes to technology. AI is a new wave, but some of the promises have not been fulfilled. And I strongly believe that when it comes to the prior technology wave or the pre-AI, we have not done anything around that. And now we are all running towards AI. So how do you see someone who's a leader in this area? How do you plug that gap to say, you know what? There's too much technology out there. There's plenty out there which can solve the problems on the ground, but we keep moving towards new forms and forget about what the actual problems are.
Yeah, I think you're very right. My position has become more and more skeptical the more time that I have spent in the AI field. I actually started working very closely with responsible AI researchers throughout my work with Humans in the Loop. We actually gave them access to our workers and to our work so that they can come in and kind of analyze the inner workings of a data annotation company and to design different types of improvements together with our workers and together with our clients, to really work on improving the whole data annotation and AI space in general through the lens of responsible AI and ethical AI. And I would say I have come, thanks to interacting with these researchers, to see also all of the dangerous and harmful side effects that AI can have as a technology and as an industry itself, and to also see through that hype and to recognize all of the financial interests that are hidden behind hyping this technology so much, right? So OpenAI is now raising something like $2 trillion or something. I really don't know what number it is right now, but it's enormous amount of money that they need in order to keep training their models, in order to keep investing in these enormous data centers and the enormous use of energy and resources for training these technologies and subsidizing their workers so that they can keep, expanding their market reach. But it's a technology that is arguably not very useful in many cases. And, just because this message has been repeated for such a long time over the past years that, AI is here, the AI revolution, everyone needs to participate, it's going to change our lives, this and that. So it's like this message that has been on loop for such a long time that people are afterwards internalizing it and they're saying, oh, wow, I need to be using AI. Everyone else is using it. It's such a revolutionary tool and technology. And I'm seeing people organizing conferences and they're like, oh, we need to participate in the AI revolution. We should not miss out on that. And it's kind of this blind following of and parroting of these messages that are designed in order to, of course, promote adoption of tools such as ChatGPT and to generate revenue. Of course, now there's like 700 million users of ChatGPT around the world. And, it is generating quite a lot of money through paid subscriptions. But I am seeing that, as you mentioned, very frequently, these are maybe uses that do not have a particular problem that they need to solve. They're actually there to just make us dumber and to make our lives easier by generating text for us when we could as well be the ones doing this for ourselves. And it has been proven that ChatGPT users are becoming lazier and lazier in terms of, just generating text and content and so on, and, thinking on their own instead of relying so much on the tool. So that's why I'm not using any of these generative AI technologies in my daily work, in my daily life. What I'm seeing also, as you mentioned, for example, in businesses and healthcare and different types of industries, is that sometimes there is this big push to adopt AI just as so as not to lag behind and to be among the late adopters. But really nobody is working with these clients in order to create and design solutions for their problems, right? The problem-driven approach. So of course there are some very useful technologies that are making people's lives easier. Some of the most targeted ones, I guess, chatbots like Harvey that are very focused on legal work and so on. I'm not really sure what the experience of users there is, because also the legal work is very reliant on hard facts, on structuring information, and you cannot rely on LLMs to handle all of the information in a very organized way, just because they are prone to hallucinations. So there is always the small risk that the AI system is going to generate something which does not make sense. So we really don't know what the adoption rate there is and what the experience of users is. But I do agree with you that sometimes as practitioners in the healthcare industry, in the legal industry, they should be focusing on solutions that actually solve their problems rather than just adopting the latest overhyped technology.
Yeah, which is why I feel when the discussion around technology now comes in, especially when we talk about AI, the human side gets lost, which is why we need more of Evas in this world who's doing such a fantastic work, focusing on people, focusing on individuals, and again, a group of people who are really marginalized in a system which works on both the ends and people are stuck in between. So you mentioned about the legal side and some of the examples you gave, which brings us to the question around ethical AI. A lot of these organizations are pretending to talk about ethics when it comes to artificial intelligence, but then the conversation goes towards the algorithm again. It takes you away from people altogether. So in your work and as an individual who's been in between on the ground, what does ethical AI mean to you? And when it comes to people labeling, correcting, and quality control?
Yeah, it's a big question. And as you have said, there is a big divide in the AI industry between the so-called AI ethicists and who care about responsible AI and the so-called AI safety engineers, right? And these people, even if it sounds very similar what they're working on, they actually have very different mindsets. So the first ones, the ethical AI group, they care a lot about the external consequences of AI systems related to biases, prejudice that these AI systems are promoting and that they replicate. They care about different types of representational harms through these AI systems or the environmental harms of the AI industry as a whole, the usage of water, the usage of resources. There's so many different harms that can be done, by AI systems and by the whole industry. While people that are now working very actively in the AI industry and call themselves, AI safety engineers, these are people who just care about the algorithms. How can we make sure that we don't once we reach super intelligence and algorithms become more intelligent than humans, how can we make sure that they are aligned with our values and so on? So this type of like super alignment focus, which could be a problem for society, but it's such a theoretical problem when we have so many practical problems that are present in front of our eyes. So there is this big ideological difference in the work of these two groups. On my end, I definitely am working more in terms of the human aspect of the ethical AI field. And I've been working for a very long time, as I mentioned, with ethical AI researchers on defining who are these workers that are working behind the AI systems. What conditions are they working in? Are we paying them fairly? Do they have consistent work? So that has been something that we have been working on a lot, just because the AI industry is and has been characterized by very inconsistent work. Maybe today you're training one system, then another one. Maybe afterwards you don't have any data to label. So all of these people who have been training your data for several months are now left without a job just because it's a very inconsistent workload. So this is actually one of the main problems, not even the low payment, because sometimes if you have decided that, okay, I'm going to work several hours per day and I'm going to earn a small amount of money, I'm just going to use it as pocket money. That's not even such a big issue if the payment is small, but rather that these tasks are very inconsistent. Sometimes on platforms, like remote tasks and others, they're crowdsourced. So anyone can sign up and have access to these platforms. You have notifications for one single task at different hours of the day. You have to be constantly monitoring your phone or your laptop for notifications. You have to run and be one of the first ones to complete it. So that has been described a lot in different research, and it should be addressed already by these types of platforms. And there are initiatives like Fair Work and other organizations that are really trying to do due diligence on companies and on their practices in order to ensure fair work opportunities and practices for all of these workers. But yes, there are sometimes very subtle issues that a person person from the outside would not be able to identify as a serious issue. Another one has been, for example, iterations on instructions. And, once the instructions have been submitted to the workers, the fact that sometimes workers realize that they do not cover all of the edge cases that they can see in the documents and in the data. And sometimes they're unable to define how should they label one thing or another when it doesn't appear in their instructions. So there's a lot of back and forth that usually has to happen between the worker and the requester in order to define all of these edge cases and how they should be handled. The problem is when there isn't such a communication channel, so the worker just submits something to the best of their abilities, and then the requester actually rejects that work or they refuse payment because it does not comply to their expectations. So very frequently these types of rejected projects or requests for unpaid iterations and repeat work and so on and corrections. This is something that can actually frustrate the worker a lot and can harm the relationship. So they're very small and subtle things, but once you're in the industry, you start noticing that small things like these can actually make a big difference for workers.
So is it a case where it's a new territory where rules are obviously not defined very clearly? But then I also feel that there is a bit of looking back. And again, I take a philosophical viewpoint to this because the previous iteration of a digital world was not sufficiently regulated. You come to a point where whether it's a big or small, now we are into AI world. It suffers from that same problem where things are not properly adequately put in place. I understand it's very difficult to put it in place as well, but then we have let the genie out of the bottle before we've set the rules, and now everyone is on this. We are talking about literally, like you mentioned a few minutes back, it's all about the economization. At the end of the day, the economic value it creates for whoever it is, whether it's employee, whether this organization, whether it's government, they've jumped on the bandwagon as well. Would you agree with this notion that we've let it out before we've set the rules of the game? And now this is becoming really, really dangerous because not for anything else, but it is exploiting a certain group of people who are suffering a great deal.
Yeah, you're completely right. And of course, there has been a lot of gray space in this whole data annotation market. A lot of companies that are paying small amounts of money to anyone who completes a task online. Do you know where that money is going to? Do you know whether the person, who the person is? What is their identity? Do they have the right to work in this country? There are so many ways to circumvent labor laws and regulations around employment if you start paying people online in such a way, especially in the field of refugees. There have been a lot of issues, but also a lot of opportunities. So I would say that because in some countries, refugees do not have the legal right to work, this type of online work has actually given them the only opportunity that they have to earn money. So this type of gray area can be thought of as a blessing and a curse at the same time, just because, of course, it deprives people from these regulations and these protections for workers and for paid work that they would usually have in regulated markets. But when they do not have any right to work, it's actually, their only opportunity and their only choice. So it really leaves them very vulnerable. And I agree that working on these types of platforms can be very lucrative and very motivating for a lot of people. But for many, especially when, as I mentioned, sometimes there's very little tasks to be performed. You stay up all night and you earn $1 on 10 10 cent increments. So it can be very discouraging and can make people very vulnerable. But it can also be an interesting opportunity. So I would say here, of course, is the responsibility of all of these crowdsourcing platforms and data annotation companies like ourselves to ensure that we have ethical work standards and that we comply with our regulations.
Let's circle back to your model, which obviously blends the social impact with the tech services, which for me, I feel is a paradox in the enterprise world. But how do you balance between running a sustainable business? Because from the conversation you've been having, it's very clear to you, it's not just about giving them the opportunity, but staying true to your mission of helping a group of people who need that opportunity to not only just survive, but thrive as well.
So in my case, it has always been about the social mission. It was never about AI. We ended up in the AI field by coincidence, but It has always been about helping people that we notice may benefit from support with their livelihoods, with their skills, with their job opportunities, and so on through the digital economy. So the fact is that we have always prioritized our social mission above all. And we have a hybrid model where we have a for-profit company and a non-profit foundation. So they're very closely tied together. They work together on different programs. On the one hand, the for-profit is working on paid job opportunities. The nonprofit is working on training programs for our workers and for the wider refugee communities. So we have always been working on that. Even now going forward, the model still remains the same, even if we are going to switch our types of services in our industry, if we decide to move away from AI and just focus on something else. I would say the fact that we have kind of this north light, north star that guides us and that aligns us in a way to the same mission is really important, because otherwise you may end up, very with a very weak value proposition, with a very weak mission, with a very weak alignment between the different team members who may decide to pursue different opportunities or different areas of the market and so on, different services. So I would say this has been always very important for us, and it's definitely an essential thing for any business, and especially for social enterprises like ours.
But the distraction is always there, isn't it, between your impact of what you want to do and then thinking from an economic point of view in terms of scaling. Obviously scaling is the big thing when it comes to young entrepreneurs and a young organization as well. Have you had that trade-off? Have you had that conversation in your mind when it comes to that impact to scale? What should we do? I'm so glad you mentioned about the North Star, which is very philosophical again.
Yeah, absolutely. We've always had this question of how much do we want to scale and at what price. For an organization like ours, it's actually great if we're able to scale, just because the more projects that we have and the more clients that we have, the more people we're going to be able to provide with work. So, it's not a sacrifice that we need to make. However, the problem would come if we have the same number of clients, but we want to scale in terms of our workers in order to satisfy some type of milestone or some type of threshold that we need in order to demonstrate how great we are. So for example, if we have 100 clients working with 1,000 people, 1,000 workers, we can definitely create work for 2,000 or 5,000 people, but that would mean that we actually have to decrease the amount of work that each person has access to in order to bump up our numbers, right? So that has been always a big trade-off. And at one point we decided, okay, let's actually decrease our number of workers. Let's make sure that we have maybe a smaller group of workers, but that they have more work every day and more revenue per person as well. So that has been a trade-off on our end, but we have never had to sacrifice market scalability versus impact scalability, just because they go together hand in hand.
That's a great space to be in, isn't it? But you don't see them just as beneficiaries. For you, they are collaborators in the system you are trying to build. So my question to you, how does that shift in that mindset changes the way you approach your work, especially when you engage with someone outside, your clients or your organizations, the people in and around you, other institution in and around you?
Yeah, of course. I think it's really essential, especially in human centered organizations, to be working with your beneficiaries and your users and to try to incorporate them as much as possible in the organization as well. And I think also, when it comes to any type of activism, you have to let the people who have the lived experience to lead the development of the organization and the direction. So we have several different mechanisms for doing that. First of all, of course, we employ people from our target groups in our team. So we have several people with the lived experience of migration and being refugees. We also have a beneficiary advisory board where, in addition to our standard advisory board, we have an advisory board just compiled of refugees and different countries that we work with. So we work on different types of missions and questions with them every month so that they can tap into their communities. They can present us with their feedback. We can design different solutions together and improvements for our work. So that has been really nice. And yeah, we always try to, of course, we have very robust impact measurement methodologies and feedback gathering methodologies so that on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, on a contract basis, we always request feedback from our workers. We always try to, dispute with clients whenever there is a disagreement, whenever we can stand up for our workers and kind of defend their right. Whenever the client is unhappy with something, we do this type of mediation. So there's a lot of work that we as an organization are doing in order to represent the interests of our workers, and to really defend them as well on the market.
So they're really engaged and they're really part of the movement which you are trying to take forward. Now, you've received some great recognition for your work, real recognition, most notably Cartier Women's Initiative Award. I just want to know what that moment meant for you, not just visibility or funding, but personally. What did it tell you? What did it indicate to you?
Yeah, for me, it was actually a sign that.
So this question has been asked to you so many times.
No. It's a really important question, because for me, it was also a sign that, okay, you've done your work, you've achieved all of this recognition, you don't need more. That was a bit of the sentiment that I had afterwards, just because also at the awards of the Cartier Women's Initiative, I was already pregnant. I knew that I would be going on maternity leave afterwards. So it was this sentiment of, okay, we've achieved, all of this recognition, these awards, and it has all been great. I've had the opportunity to travel, to represent the organization. I've been really fortunate in that sense that we've received so much recognition, and it's been really amazing, and a lot of PR, and I've done it for the organization, of course, because it really can help to drive the organization's image and reputation and visibility, but also for myself, of course, because it's a really great experience to be at these events and at these awards and interacting with people that are like you and that are very motivated and are working on similar initiatives, and to have all this PR and visibility. But at one point, I decided that, okay, maybe I've had enough. Maybe it's time for me to step out, to let others lead the organization, and for me to also think of what can I do next that can be very impactful, and that doesn't have to put me in front and my image in front. Just because at one point I felt that, it was very important for me as the leader of Humans in the Loop to be out there, to be speaking to the media, to be speaking to clients, to be active on social media and so on. But at one point it becomes more about me than the organization or the cause. And the organization, of course, benefits a lot from this exposure and visibility. But if I step out, the organization remains actually maybe a little bit hurt by the fact that, this powerful image and this powerful leader is not there anymore. So in the end, I decided, okay, in my next endeavor, I don't want it to be about me. I don't want it to be about the woman leader on the front and about the CEO and like interviews and so on. I mean, of course, I love to have chats like these. So that's why I agreed to have this podcast interview. I really don't want it to make about me anymore, because I've had my share of like, okay, visibility and that, it's all very nice. But yeah, I really want in my work now to prioritize the cause. And that's why when I started working with Tech for Palestine recently and working on this new initiative, Entrepreneurs for Palestine, I'm not the leader of the organization. So I've decided, okay, let me join an existing organization that is doing important work. And I'm not going to put myself forward. I don't have to, I don't need to anymore. And I really want to prioritize, the important work that we're doing for people on the ground. And they are the ones deserving this visibility and deserving, this type of recognition. So I think for me, especially this last award, the Cartier Women's Initiative, because as you mentioned, it's one of the most prestigious and one of the most important ones. It was really kind of a big milestone for me that was very defining.
Yeah, it tells a lot about you, Eva, the person you are. For those of us listening, in terms of the values when it comes to being an entrepreneur, this is very important, what you just mentioned. I probably believe that's your mantra when it comes to staying close to the people and the communities for whom you work, as obviously things scale up when it comes to your organization. But have you put anything in place to protect the values in the relationship that made it possible for you in the first place?
Yes, of course. I think our entire team continues working the same way. I'm very grateful to have them. They're really amazing, and they're continuing to push forward and to lead the organization in new ways towards new directions. I'm very happy that we have this great structure that is already put in. We have our mission and vision that are clear. We have our theory of change that, of course, need change. in different ways, but at least, we're all aligned, as I mentioned previously. And it's really important, especially in these times of change management. But I would say also the fact that we have very robust policies around our impact, around what we want to achieve, how we do it, all of these internal metrics and the way that we do things. I think it's really important that even if I'm not there, these are operations that continue being observed and the team continues following them. It's very encouraging to see that, after working, I think it was around 7 years that I spent with Humans in the Loop, actively leading the organization. After stepping out, that the organization continues being there, continues thriving, continues growing. I think this is one of the most satisfying things that you as an entrepreneur can feel, after leading an organization and starting it from zero.
So just a few simple questions to round it all up. My first question to you is, what is that people misunderstand, whether that is the refugees and the technology? And when I say technology, these days people are only talking about AI. What do you think people misunderstand when it comes to either of these?
I would say in the case of refugees, there's definitely a misunderstanding of what constitutes a refugee versus a migrant. Of course, there's a lot of blurred lines when it comes to those seeking a better life and fleeing from conflict, from post-conflict areas and so on. And of course, it's a very politicized notion. So I would say this is in the case of migrants versus refugees, who has the right to seek asylum, to seek a better life, to get access to, live in a new country. Of course, I as a European, am very privileged to be able to relocate to any country that I want to without any questions asked in terms of the European Union. But this is a privilege not given to others, the third country residents, so-called. So I would say this is definitely one of the elements of inequality that we have nowadays. In terms of technology, I would say, something that you and I discussed previously, where it comes to very frequently technology being used as a hammer that's looking for its nail rather than as an actual solution to a problem. Very frequently, solutions are being built with the build it and they will come mindset, instead of really working with the users, understanding their problems, and trying to create something that's useful for them, that's practical, and that they're going to be using for the future. And I think that's a very common problem in the technology and the startup field in general.
You've touched on a lot of different things there, but I'll quickly move on to the next question, which relates to your role in Humans in the Loop, of course, and then Tech for Palestine, where you have joined in and you're contributing with your experience and your learning. But are you cautious, or are you nervous about things going forward in terms of the industry, the impact of the industry, where the technology is heading, an impact on people, because you're a people person?
Yes, I would say I'm definitely monitoring everything that is happening. I am feeling some kind of, caution, perhaps, in terms of big players and how they're acting, the money that they're raising. What is the overall effect of these industries that we're all participating in? Because, yes, as I mentioned, despite the hype, there is so much that can be investigated in terms of the overall effects of the industry, as I mentioned, on the environment, on the usage of water, on the usage of electricity. There's these enormous data centers that are now being built. There are such, elements in the whole power grid, right? And I think there's not enough attention being paid to all of these external consequences of these otherwise hyped industries. And they're usually also hidden a bit as elements that these companies do not want to speak about. But they're really essential. And I would say, especially for those of us who care about the climate crisis and about climate change, it's really important to be monitoring and just being very aware of the external effects of such.
I mean, call me naive, but would you agree with me if I say that the monopoly and the monetization model of some of these organizations, especially as we build the AI infrastructure, has to be dismantled, and we need to start looking at an alternative model when it comes to these big corporations and how they're exploiting less developed nations in making sure their infrastructure is pumped up?
Yeah, of course, there's such a big picture that we have to bear in mind in terms of the resources that are being extracted. For example, all of these precious metals in the Congo, they're now also related to, internal conflict that is happening there around the world, different types of resources, natural resources that are being extracted. There is actually this really interesting book called Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford, and it presents, this really big picture of AI technologies and how from the precious metals that are being extracted through, the work of the data annotation workers, through afterwards the creation of different types of AI systems. And it's really a very comprehensive outlook filled with very interesting perspectives and stories and her own research. So I highly recommend that. And of course, it's really important that we as users have to put our money where our heart is, and really use solutions that are aligned with our values, and to boycott the ones that are having a harmful effect on societies, on the ecosystem and the environment. Just because, it's really, even though it's just one person, when we mobilize and come together, there's so many apps and platforms right now to help us with ethical shopping and boycotting of different brands, not only the ones that are involved, for example, in Palestine and who are promoting, and involved in the genocide and complicit in some way, but also brands that are that do not have sufficient environmental policies and so on. So we as users have this power of at least deciding what to put our money on and where to spend it. And I think it's really, very a very big power if we're able to mobilize and use it all together.
So your message, your single message coming out of this is walk the talk. You have to make sure you're ethically aligned to what you believe in, and you do that, you show it to people around you in the society as well. And again, leaders like you, Eva, are doing wonderful work, and it serves an example to everyone in and around them, whether that's the Eastern world or the Western world. My last question to you, Eva, is on this podcast, we talk a lot about building in the broken system, which is what the podcast is, Builders on the Broken Bazaar. And I strongly believe, my heart on the sleeve, where I say that the world needs fixing in a lot of different ways. But what does it mean to you? And how do you actually stay grounded when you see things like Palestine at the moment, which I feel is the single biggest issue at the moment? How do you cope with it? Is there a mechanism? Do you find a way where things are very fragile? You don't like it. It's very unjust. How do you go about that?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because as I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, it could really weigh down on you and you can become very frustrated and you can feel helpless. But what I do is to just find the people who are doing work on these issues, like what I did with Tech for Palestine when I joined. Just find a way to do, even if it's a very small part, even if you can just volunteer a couple of hours of your day, you can donate a small amount, just do something small, because all of these small acts that amount to something bigger, and they contribute to this wider systemic change.
Is there anything you want to give a shout at to anything related to your work, your new venture, or anything at all which is close to your heart?
Yeah, I can definitely give a shout out to all of the Palestinians who are now in Palestine, in Gaza. They're really amazing examples of resistance, of perseverance, of faith, of just persevering in the face of anything. So I really send my heart to all of them. Just want to say them that they're a really big inspiration, and to really tell them to keep up, their fight and their will and their perseverance, because they're a great example for all of us.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you so much for that. You're a model entrepreneur, and thank you for coming on to this podcast. Your work, your clarity, the commitment you have to building what you're building is absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. And for those listening, you can learn more about Eva's work on humansintheloop.org. You could follow her work online and through some of the sources. Cartier Women's Initiative, of course. You can have a look at the website. If this episode gave you a new perspective on what AI is, what technology is, what labor or inclusion is all about, please don't hesitate in tagging us or sharing or subscribing to more stories like us. Until the next time, thank you so much.